The fastest way to discover a person's true character is to give them the power to humiliate someone who cannot fight back. The grand ballroom of the Regent Lexington Hotel in downtown Atlanta shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers as more than 400 business leaders, investors, journalists, and community partners gathered for Sterling Global's annual Leadership Gala, an event broadcast live across multimedia platforms to celebrate another record-breaking year for one of America's fastest-growing corporations. Every table reflected elegance, every camera captured success, and every guest expected to witness another flawless performance from Ethan Sterling, the 50-year-old white billionaire chief executive officer whose reputation for demanding excellence had become legendary throughout corporate America. Standing confidently beneath the stage lights in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, Ethan welcomed the audience with practiced confidence while reporters positioned themselves near the front of the ballroom, their cameras streaming every moment to thousands of viewers watching from home. Behind the polished presentation, dozens of hotel employees moved quietly with military precision, ensuring every glass, every meal, and every detail reflected five-star perfection. Among them was Naomi Brooks, a 29-year-old black waitress wearing a crisp white shirt beneath a neatly pressed black waitress apron. She carried herself with calm professionalism, greeting every guest with genuine courtesy while balancing polished silver trays through crowded aisles without drawing attention to herself. She had worked countless luxury events before, understanding that the best service often meant becoming nearly invisible. As Ethan prepared to introduce Sterling Global's newest charitable initiative, a guest suddenly stepped backward without looking, brushing against Naomi's serving tray. One champagne flute tilted unexpectedly, sending a small splash across the sleeve of Ethan's expensive tuxedo jacket. The ballroom froze. The orchestra stopped playing. Hundreds of conversations disappeared into complete silence as every camera instinctively turned toward the stage. Naomi immediately lowered the tray and spoke with sincere professionalism. "I am so sorry, sir. That was an accident." The stain covered only a small portion of the jacket, hardly noticeable beneath the ballroom lights. But Ethan's expression hardened instantly. His jaw tightened as he stared at the young waitress standing before him. Without asking what had happened or listening to anyone nearby, he reached for the microphone still broadcasting live across the ballroom and beyond. "This is exactly what happens when standards disappear," he said coldly. "Security, remove her credentials. Effective immediately, she no longer works at this event." A wave of uncomfortable whispers spread through the audience. Naomi remained completely still. She did not argue. She did not cry. She simply lowered her eyes for a brief moment before quietly removing the event identification badge from her apron. Several hotel employees exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared interrupt the billionaire whose authority dominated both the company and the evening. Ethan turned back toward the audience as though nothing important had happened. "Professionalism matters," he declared. "There are consequences for carelessness." His words echoed through the ballroom while television cameras continued recording every second. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time that evening, the confidence disappeared from his face. 10 minutes can feel like an ordinary stretch of time until those same 10 minutes decide whether a lifetime of success survives or collapses. Ethan Sterling stared at the emergency notification glowing across his phone screen, and the color slowly drained from his face. It was not a message from an assistant or another executive. It came directly from Sterling Global's chief legal officer, marked urgent and requesting an immediate secure call. Ethan stepped away from the microphone as the ballroom orchestra remained silent and hundreds of guests watched with growing curiosity. The live broadcast continued without interruption, capturing every uncertain expression that crossed the billionaire's face. He answered the call in a controlled voice. "What happened?" The response came without hesitation. "Sir, we have a serious problem. The federal contract presentation scheduled for tonight cannot proceed. The encrypted access credentials failed during the final verification. The only certified specialist authorized to recover the secure presentation is unavailable, and the government representatives have already arrived. Ethan frowned. Call another specialist. There was a brief silence before the legal officer answered. We already did. No one else has the authorization level required to restore the system before the presentation begins. Ethan looked toward the ballroom entrance where several distinguished government officials had quietly taken their seats moments earlier. Sterling Global had spent nearly 2 years competing for this contract, one that would create thousands of jobs across multiple states and secure the company's future for years to come. Failure tonight would damage investor confidence, destroy months of negotiations, and place every major expansion project at risk. Ethan lowered his voice. Tell me who has access. The answer came immediately. Naomi Brooks. Ethan remained completely still. That is impossible. No, sir. Before joining the hotel, while caring for her mother, MS. Brooks worked as a certified cybersecurity systems analyst for a federal technology contractor. She personally designed part of the legacy authentication protocol your company still licenses today. She is the only available specialist within this building qualified to recover the encrypted presentation without violating federal security requirements. Ethan slowly turned toward the ballroom doors. Naomi had already changed out of the serving area, carrying a small box containing her personal belongings after being dismissed only minutes earlier. She walked calmly toward the exit without looking back once. She had accepted the public humiliation with remarkable composure, believing the evening had ended for her. Around the ballroom, guests continued whispering about the dramatic firing, unaware that the company's greatest crisis had only just begun. Ethan's legal officer spoke again. Sir, we have less than 15 minutes before the government delegation requests access to the secure demonstration. If we cannot deliver, the agreement will almost certainly be postponed indefinitely. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. The irony struck him with undeniable force. The woman he had judged solely by a black waitress apron possessed knowledge that neither his executive team nor his technology consultants could replace. Pride suddenly became a luxury he could no longer afford. He ended the call, looked toward the ballroom entrance where Naomi's silhouette was almost disappearing beyond the tall glass doors, and understood that saving Sterling Global now depended entirely upon the very person he had publicly dismissed before the entire nation. Real leadership is revealed not when everything goes according to plan, but when pride becomes the only obstacle standing between failure and the truth. Ethan Sterling remained frozen for only a second before instinct took over. He handed the microphone to the event host without offering an explanation and stepped quickly away from the stage, ignoring the confused expressions of investors, journalists, and board members. Every camera continued following him as whispers spread through the magnificent ballroom. Moments earlier, those same cameras had captured him dismissing a waitress without hesitation. Now they captured a billionaire, leaving his own celebration with unmistakable urgency. Outside the ballroom, Naomi Brooks walked calmly through the elegant hotel corridor carrying a small cardboard box containing her name badge, a folded apron, and the few personal belongings she had kept in the employee locker room. Her pace never changed. She did not look back toward the ballroom. She had learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant walking away without demanding an explanation. As she approached the main lobby, Ethan finally caught sight of her near the revolving entrance doors. Ms. Brooks, he called, his voice louder than he intended. Naomi stopped and slowly turned around. Her expression remained calm, neither angry nor hopeful. She simply waited. Ethan reached her a few moments later, breathing harder than expected after crossing the enormous hotel corridor. For the first time that evening, he found himself searching for words that refused to arrive easily. I need a moment of your time, he said. Naomi looked at the small box in her hands before meeting his eyes again. A few minutes ago, you made it clear that my time no longer belonged to your company. Her words were quiet, respectful, and impossible to argue with. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Something has happened. There is a critical problem involving our federal contract presentation. Naomi listened without interrupting. My legal team informed me that you designed part of the secure authentication system our company still uses. Naomi nodded once. Several years ago. Ethan continued carefully. They believe you are the only person inside this building who can restore access before the government delegation arrives. A gentle silence settled between them. Hotel guests walked through the marble lobby without realizing they were passing one of the most important conversations of the evening. Naomi finally asked his silence became the answer. Naomi studied his expression for a moment before speaking again. You did not ask what happened before firing me. You assumed carelessness because of the uniform I was wearing. Ethan felt every word more deeply than any public criticism could have reached him. You are right, he admitted quietly. I judged you before I knew you. Naomi looked through the glass entrance toward the city lights beyond the hotel. Knowledge can solve technical problems, Mr. Sterling. Character solves human ones. Those words lingered between them as Ethan realized the crisis facing Sterling Global had already become much larger than a locked presentation. It had become a test of the kind of leader he truly was. Before either of them spoke again, Ethan's phone rang once more. This time the legal officer's voice carried unmistakable urgency. Sir, the government delegation has requested the secured demonstration immediately. We have less than 10 minutes left. The hardest decision is rarely whether to solve a problem. It is whether to help the person who created it. Naomi Brooks glanced at the exit one final time before returning her attention to Ethan Sterling. His phone was still pressed against his ear as his legal officer continued explaining that representatives from the federal agency had already entered the secure demonstration suite and were waiting for the encrypted presentation that could not be unlocked. Every passing second increased the risk of losing one of the largest contracts in Sterling Global's history. Ethan slowly lowered the phone and met Naomi's eyes again. The confidence that had filled his voice only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. Ms. Brooks, he said quietly, I am asking for your help. Naomi remained composed. She did not answer immediately because she understood that urgency should never replace honesty. Help with the system? She asked. The billionaire standing before her no longer resembled the executive who had publicly dismissed her in front of hundreds of people. Pride had given way to uncertainty, and certainty had been replaced by humility. Even so, she understood that a sincere apology could not erase what had already happened. Your company has people depending on this contract, she said. Employees, families, suppliers, and communities. My decision should never punish them for your mistake. Ethan listened without interrupting. Those words alone revealed more leadership than many executives displayed throughout an entire career. Naomi continued, If I agree to help, I need 2 promises. Ethan answered immediately, Anything within my authority. She gently shook her head. Not anything. Only the right things. She held his gaze before speaking clearly. First, no one from the hotel staff will lose a job tonight because of an honest accident. Every decision must be based on facts instead of assumptions. Ethan nodded without hesitation. You have my word. Naomi continued. Second, when this evening is over, you will publicly tell the truth about what happened. Not because it helps me, but because leadership requires accountability. Ethan drew a slow breath. Those conditions were fair, yet they demanded something money could not buy. They demanded character. I accept both, he replied. Naomi studied his face for another moment, searching not for confidence, but for sincerity. Finally, she placed the small cardboard box on a nearby reception table and carefully folded the black waitress apron she had removed only moments earlier. Then let us save your company, she said calmly. Relief crossed Ethan's face for the first time since receiving the emergency call. No one understood why the dismissed waitress had suddenly returned alongside the company's most powerful executive. No one except Ethan realized that the future of Sterling Global no longer depended upon wealth, influence, or authority. It depended entirely upon the quiet intelligence of the woman he had failed to see until the moment he needed her most. Extraordinary ability rarely announces itself with applause. More often, it quietly waits for someone willing to look beyond a uniform. The secure executive conference suite on the second floor of the Regent Lexington Hotel stood in sharp contrast to the celebration still unfolding inside the grand ballroom. Around a polished walnut conference table sat senior executives from Sterling Global, government procurement officials, cybersecurity advisors, and legal representatives, all staring at a large encrypted display that refused to unlock. Every failed authentication attempt had been carefully documented, and no one dared touch the system again for fear of triggering additional federal security protections. As Ethan Sterling entered beside Naomi Brooks, several executives looked up with visible confusion. Some recognized her as the waitress who had been publicly dismissed only minutes earlier. Others exchanged puzzled glances, unable to understand why the chief executive officer had brought a hotel employee into one of the company's most confidential meetings. Ethan spoke before anyone else could question her presence. "Ms. Brooks is here at my request. She has my complete authorization to assess the system." The room fell quiet. Naomi calmly stepped toward the workstation, placing her small cardboard box on an empty chair before carefully studying the encrypted interface. She did not rush. She did not touch the keyboard immediately. Instead, she observed every notification, every security prompt, every authentication log displayed across the monitor. After nearly a minute, she looked toward the company's technology director. "Who initiated the last recovery attempt?" The director raised his hand. "I did." Naomi nodded politely. "You followed the current technical manual." He looked surprised. "Yes." Naomi gently smiled. "The manual is outdated. This authentication framework still contains a legacy verification layer that was intentionally preserved after the federal security upgrade. If someone follows only the current documentation, the system assumes the recovery request is incomplete and automatically locks the encrypted presentation." Several technology specialists immediately leaned closer to the monitor. Naomi continued speaking with quiet confidence. "The legacy verification sequence was never removed because certain federal agencies required backward compatibility for archived secure communications. I recommended updating the documentation years ago, but the revision was never implemented." Ethan slowly realized that every word she spoke reflected first-hand knowledge rather than theory. She was not guessing. She understood the system because she had helped create part of its foundation. Naomi carefully requested a secure authentication device from the technology team. Once it was placed before her, she entered a precise sequence of verification commands, paused while the system completed multiple encrypted checks, and finally entered one additional authorization pathway almost no one else in the room recognized. The large display remained still for several long seconds before the security warning disappeared. Moments later, the confidential federal presentation opened successfully across the screen. A collective breath of relief swept through the conference suite. Government representatives quietly confirmed that every encrypted document remained intact and uncompromised. One senior procurement official smiled with genuine appreciation. "Excellent work, Ms. Brooks. That is exactly the recovery procedure our agency expected." Ethan watched the screen illuminate with the presentation his company believed had been lost only minutes earlier. Around him, executives who had once overlooked the quiet waitress now looked at her with unmistakable respect. Yet Naomi showed no sign of triumph. She simply stepped back from the workstation and said, "Your system is secure now. I also recommend updating the recovery documentation before someone else encounters the same problem." Her calm professionalism transformed the atmosphere inside the room, but Ethan understood that restoring the presentation had solved only the company's technical crisis. The much harder challenge still awaited him just beyond the conference room doors, where hundreds of guests and countless viewers were still waiting to hear what he would say next. True redemption begins the moment a person stops protecting their reputation and starts protecting the truth. Ethan Sterling stood motionless before the illuminated presentation screen as the final encrypted files loaded successfully across the display. Around the executive conference suite, relieved smiles slowly replaced anxious expressions. Government procurement officials confirmed that every required document had been recovered without compromising federal security protocols, while Sterling Global's legal team quietly resumed preparations for the presentation that had nearly collapsed only minutes earlier. One senior government representative extended a hand toward Naomi Brooks. Ms. Brooks, your professionalism prevented a very costly delay. On behalf of our agency, thank you. Naomi accepted the handshake with quiet humility. I am glad the system is working again, she replied. That is what matters most. She never mentioned losing her job. She never reminded anyone how she had been treated. She simply gathered the authentication device, returned it to the technology director, and stepped away from the workstation as though she had completed nothing more than an ordinary task. The presentation can begin whenever you are prepared. Ethan looked toward the conference room doors leading back to the ballroom. Beyond those doors waited hundreds of guests, journalists, investors, and thousands of viewers still watching the live broadcast. They expected a business presentation celebrating corporate success. Instead, Ethan understood they deserved something much more important. He turned toward Naomi. Would you come back to the ballroom with me? Naomi looked surprised. Why? Ethan answered honestly. Because the first thing those people need to hear is not another business announcement. They need to hear the truth. Naomi remained quiet for several seconds before giving a small nod. Together they walked through the marble corridor toward the grand ballroom once again. Conversations immediately faded as every guest noticed the billionaire chief executive officer returning beside the same black waitress he had dismissed less than 30 minutes earlier. Television cameras instantly focused on them. Ethan slowly stepped onto the stage, but instead of standing behind the podium, he remained at the front, allowing the silence to settle naturally throughout the ballroom. He looked across the audience before speaking into the microphone. A short time ago, every one of you witnessed me make a decision based on assumption instead of facts. The room remained completely still. Ethan continued. I publicly dismissed Ms. In that profound silence, everyone present understood they were witnessing something far more valuable than a successful business presentation. They were watching a powerful man begin the difficult journey of becoming an honorable one. Respect becomes meaningful only when it is offered after power has already been tested. The grand ballroom remained completely silent as Ethan Sterling lowered the microphone for a brief moment, allowing his own words to settle over every executive, investor, employee, and journalist in attendance. No carefully prepared speechwriter could have created what everyone had just witnessed because genuine accountability never sounds rehearsed. Ethan slowly turned toward Naomi Brooks, who stood quietly beside the stage with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the evening. She neither celebrated nor demanded recognition. She simply waited with the patience of someone who understood that character always reveals itself through actions rather than applause. Ethan stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward her. Before the countless cameras broadcasting live across the country, he extended his hand. Ms. Brooks, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the respect I failed to show when it mattered most. Naomi looked at his hand for a brief moment before accepting it with quiet grace. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, yet it carried more meaning than the expensive contracts waiting to be signed later that evening. Ethan faced the audience once again. Earlier tonight, I allowed authority to replace fairness. I assumed that a person wearing a service uniform could not possibly possess extraordinary knowledge. That assumption almost cost this company one of the most important opportunities in our history. Around the ballroom, many executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats because they recognized pieces of themselves inside those words. Some remembered employees whose ideas they had ignored because of job titles. Others quietly reflected upon opportunities lost because they had judged appearance before ability. Leadership is not measured by how many people follow your instructions. It is measured by how carefully you listen before making decisions that affect another person's dignity. He then turned toward the hotel's management team, seated near the front of the ballroom. Effective immediately, Naomi Brooks will receive a full public withdrawal of the termination announced earlier this evening, because that decision was made without a complete understanding of the facts. Hotel employees exchanged emotional glances as several quietly smiled. Ethan continued before anyone could applaud. The choice to remain with the hotel or pursue another path will belong entirely to Ms. Brooks. No pressure, no obligation. That decision is hers alone. Naomi appreciated those words because they restored something more valuable than employment. They restored her freedom to choose. One of the senior government representatives then stood from his seat and addressed the audience. Tonight we witnessed exceptional technical expertise, but we also witnessed exceptional integrity. Ms. Brooks solved a critical problem without seeking recognition, and that professionalism reflects the values every organization should hope to encourage. Warm applause slowly spread throughout the ballroom, growing stronger as more guests rose to their feet. The standing ovation was not driven by sympathy. It was earned through competence, humility, and quiet courage. Naomi acknowledged the audience with a gentle nod, but never allowed the attention to change her composure. Ethan remained standing beside her, joining the applause rather than receiving it. For the first time that evening, the most powerful person in the room understood that real influence is never created by wealth or position. It is earned by recognizing the worth of another human being before circumstances force you to see what should have been obvious from the very beginning. The strongest organizations are not transformed by impressive speeches. They are transformed when one difficult lesson becomes a permanent standard. The following Monday morning, the headquarters of Sterling Global felt noticeably different. Employees who had watched the events at the Regent Lexington Hotel over the weekend arrived, carrying conversations that had little to do with quarterly profits or market forecasts. Instead, they spoke about accountability, humility, and the extraordinary woman whose quiet expertise had protected the company from an embarrassing failure. The recording of Ethan Sterling's public apology had spread across business news programs and professional leadership forums throughout the country, prompting executives from other companies to discuss a simple but uncomfortable question. How many talented people had they overlooked because of appearance, job title, or first impressions? Ethan refused every request to turn the incident into a publicity campaign. He instructed the communications department to avoid promotional interviews and instead focus on meaningful internal reforms. During the first executive leadership meeting of the week, he stood before senior managers without prepared notes. What happened at the gala was not one person's mistake, he said calmly. It exposed weaknesses in the culture that allowed assumptions to replace curiosity. That responsibility begins with me. The room remained silent as he announced a series of immediate changes. Every employee, regardless of position, would receive direct access to a confidential process for sharing ideas and reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. Hiring, promotion, and performance reviews would include independent evaluations designed to reduce personal bias. Cross-departmental innovation sessions would pair executives with frontline employees so that experience from every level of the organization could be heard before important decisions were made. Ethan also established an annual leadership requirement that every executive spend scheduled time working alongside customer service teams, warehouse staff, administrative employees, and support personnel, not as a symbolic exercise, but as an opportunity to understand the people whose daily work sustained the company. Many managers recognized that these policies demanded more effort than any financial investment because they required humility instead of convenience. Meanwhile, Naomi Brooks received numerous employment offers from technology firms, cybersecurity companies, and consulting organizations impressed by her professional reputation. She thanked each organization respectfully but declined to make a quick decision. For several days, she focused instead on caring for her mother and considering what kind of workplace truly deserved her talents. Late that week, Ethan requested a private meeting at Sterling Global headquarters. This time there were no cameras, no audience, and no public relations advisors waiting nearby. He welcomed Naomi personally at the front entrance rather than asking an assistant to escort her. Their conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Ethan never attempted to persuade her with salary figures or executive titles. Instead, he explained the cultural reforms already underway and admitted that rebuilding trust would require consistent actions over time rather than promises made in a single meeting. Naomi listened carefully before offering thoughtful suggestions about mentorship, employee development, and recognizing hidden talent throughout the organization. Ethan took notes himself. That small gesture spoke louder than any speech he had delivered on stage because it demonstrated that he had finally learned to value wisdom before status. As Naomi left the building that afternoon, many employees noticed something that had never happened before. The chief executive officer remained at the front entrance until she disappeared from view, not because she worked for him, but because genuine respect no longer depended upon rank. It had become part of the culture he was determined to build from that day forward. Several months later, very few people remembered the expensive decorations, the elegant speeches, or the contracts signed during that remarkable evening at the Regent Lexington Hotel. What they remembered was a moment that quietly changed the direction of an entire company. Sterling Global successfully secured the federal partnership that had once seemed impossible to save. But inside the organization, many employees believed the company's greatest achievement had nothing to do with revenue or expansion. It was the culture that had emerged from one uncomfortable lesson in humility. The new leadership initiatives gradually reshaped the workplace. Frontline employees who had once remained silent now confidently shared ideas that improved operations, strengthened customer relationships, and solved problems executives had overlooked for years. Managers learned to ask more questions before making decisions. New employees quickly discovered that respect was expected rather than optional, regardless of job title or uniform. During one quarterly leadership meeting, Ethan Sterling looked across a conference room filled with people from every department instead of only senior executives. The discussion included engineers, administrative assistants, warehouse supervisors, customer service representatives, interns, and hospitality staff. Every voice carried equal weight because Ethan had finally understood that wisdom never arrives wearing a predictable uniform. Naomi Brooks accepted a new position at Sterling Global, not because of prestige or compensation, but because she believed lasting change deserved an opportunity to grow. She became Director of Secure Systems Innovation while also helping establish a mentorship program dedicated to identifying hidden talent throughout the company. Young employees who doubted their own potential often left conversations with Naomi carrying renewed confidence because she never encouraged them to chase recognition. Before every major meeting, he developed one simple habit. He learned the names of the employees preparing the room, serving refreshments, operating technical equipment, or greeting visitors at the front desk. He thanked them personally because he now understood that leadership begins with recognizing the humanity of people whose work is often overlooked. Visitors frequently noticed that culture before they noticed the impressive architecture or modern technology inside Sterling Global headquarters. One afternoon, months after the gala, Ethan and Naomi crossed paths in the company lobby as new employees gathered for orientation. A young receptionist smiled nervously while welcoming dozens of unfamiliar faces on her very first day. Ethan paused, greeted her warmly, and thanked her for representing the company with professionalism. Naomi noticed the young woman immediately relax. She smiled quietly because no policy manual could have created that moment. Only a changed heart could. As sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, employees moved confidently through the building, each carrying different responsibilities but sharing the same dignity. The lesson that began with a spilled glass of champagne had become something far greater than a remarkable business story. It became living proof that power may command attention, wealth may open doors, and success may fill headlines. But lasting greatness belongs only to those who choose fairness before judgment and respect before assumption. Ethan once possessed the power to control an entire room, but on one unforgettable night, Naomi Brooks reminded everyone that the greatest influence in the world will always belong to the person who protects another human being's dignity when it matters most.